There's so much to talk about in the first episode of NUFC Transfer Daily this week, as Newcastle United make their play for both Joao Pedro and Anthony Elanga, and the price for Takefusa Kubo has also been set. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel on the second week of NUFC Transfer Daily. There is plenty to talk about, as I've just mentioned in the intro. I said that I would do these shows Monday to Friday, and then everything sort of happened Friday night through Saturday. And I really considered coming on and doing a show to sort of catch the wind of it, but I've made a promise to both myself and to my wife. Please do hit the like button, and if you haven't already, do subscribe. Nearly 1,200 subscribers now, and it's my birthday today as well, so the least you could do is to hit that button and join the community. But yeah, we're going to get straight into it and talk about Joao Pedro and Anthony Elanga. But the first thing I want to talk about is Luke Edwards in the Telegraph has written that Newcastle are getting frustrated with the early start to the transfer window and the Saudi tax that is apparently they feel is on their transfers, and the fact that they are being charged more than is the going rate for these players. And I just want to make this point really, that this is why I think Newcastle should go and look abroad, because the Premier League is a notoriously difficult place to do business anyway, and Newcastle are a real threat. Clubs don't want to sell to them, so it's not going to be made easy. And also there's a little bit of hypocrisy. I hate to say it. Joao Pedro, for example, 3 years on his contract he's got left at the Amex Stadium. They bought him for 30 million. They'll want at least double. He scored double figures last season. It was only 10 goals. He scored 18 in the season before. It's very easy for us to say that that's overpriced, and you know, I think that he is probably overpriced, but again, in the context of the situation, it's difficult for Newcastle to accuse Brighton of that, or Nottingham Forest for Anthony Elanga, and then also when Manchester City are linked with Tino Livramento, say that he's going to cost 60 or 70 million, and that's really just what happens in the Premier League. You don't want to sell to rivals. No club really has to sell anymore because of the level of financial security in the league now. The difference, not just between the league now and sort of 5-10 years ago, or even now in the Championship, but now crucially and the other European leagues. That's why Europe is such a good market to buy from, because the financial power goes a lot further. And it's, as I say, it's very rich of Newcastle that if they are feeling this way, to shop in the Premier League market and then complain that they can't get good value. Then they're also doing the same thing to other clubs. It's not a problem that Newcastle are doing that. It's the right thing that they should be doing. But that's what Brighton are doing. That's what Nottingham Forest are doing as well. So I can't really get on board with this Saudi tax, Newcastle tax. That Newcastle were met by this with Mark Gahey last summer from Crystal Palace. It's very difficult to feel sorry for them when they're not, by the sounds of it, looking in terms of media reports. I'm sure they are, but when all the media reports are coming out suggesting that they're only chasing Premier League targets. But we will talk first of all about Anthony Elanga, because that was the one that broke first. And I was quite vocal about this when it happened. I'd written a piece for Forbes, as I'd mentioned last week, about why Newcastle should shop abroad, and I'd given examples of their own business, Botman and Tonali, having won titles in other countries and being really, really highly rated as some of the best players in Europe when they came to the Premier League. And also Tijani Reinders going to Man City as the best midfielder in Serie A last season for £46 million. They bid £40 million for Elanga last summer in a very panicky end of window scramble, and it didn't go very far, but you can guarantee that Forest will want at least £50 million for Elanga. 6 goals, 11 assists as Forest got into the Conference League. They're in Europe. There's a project building there. I don't think he's going to be pushing to leave. Obviously, there's connections with Isaac and Kraft and William Masula, as we've seen on social media. There's reasons why he might come to Newcastle, and there's reasons certainly why Newcastle will be interested to look at his output. But the value on his head is going to be a very difficult deal to do. Yes, he's 23. This is exactly what I mean about money going further. Those deals are going to be really, really difficult to do and very protracted, very public. Newcastle found themselves in this situation last summer with Gahey, as I mentioned. This is what's in store for Newcastle again this summer, because everything will be known from both ends, Newcastle and Nottingham Forest. There's reporters on the ground covering everything and also saying different things. So the other thing I want to mention about transfers and how they work is don't always listen to everything you hear. Sometimes you might hear contradicting information coming out at different times because people speak to different people with different agendas, and that's kind of how these things work. It's always the best policy to wait until they're holding the scarf in front of the East Stand, as the old saying goes. Nottingham Forest don't want to sell in. Yes, there's 17 goal contributions last season and a further 14 in a struggling team the season before, so he's done really well in 2 years at Nottingham Forest, undoubtedly proving himself after leaving Manchester United. But Forest bought him for $3 million and have developed him into this player, giving him that platform. Why can't Newcastle go and find a player for a better value? That's my argument. He's right-footed, so he's not going to invert on that side. He wants inverted wingers on both sides, and perhaps there's a tactical change, and yes, there's evidence that Jacob Murphy did that this season, and maybe that's changed Eddie Howe's mind. We don't know. It would be a shame to me because Newcastle didn't fix this problem 2 years ago, the last time they spent money, and they really didn't go and solve a lot of problems. They were very opportunistic 2 years ago, and that window's shown itself to be a brilliant one, but at the time it wasn't because it didn't solve certain issues, and I think that would happen this season. With Elanga on that side, it would be a shame not to see that sort of system at its absolute full pelt, especially considering that Eddie Howe has been so wedded to it, as I've said so many times on this channel, for the last 3 years. It's evolved, but it's always been 4-3-3 with the idea of inverted wingers. Obviously, that changed this season out of necessity, but the understanding was it was always going to go back to that. It wouldn't if Elanga came in, and yeah, I think that this one is he's a very, very good player. Does he improve Newcastle? Absolutely. But the money that you're going to have to spend, and there's lots of sort of doubt about whether it's Elanga and Joao Pedro, and obviously we'll touch on Joao Pedro in a second. For different reasons, you really don't answer all the questions in the squad. You don't have a coherent squad playing to the way that Eddie Howe purports to want to play if you bring either one or both in, because Joao Pedro is predominantly a striker, can play out wide, but is right-footed. Again, he wouldn't invert, and it would be a strange thing to do to spend £50 million on one or two of those players and ultimately solve the problem that Eddie Howe's wanted to solve on that side. Within that context, that money is really, really hefty to pay, and you could go and find somebody who suits that, who fits that bill better. Obviously, there is ways that both of them fit perfectly. Premier League experience, 23, big ceilings, but do they have the highest ceilings in Europe? That's my question, and I think you could go and get better value elsewhere. I already voiced concerns about Joao Pedro last week because I think he would prefer to play up front. He'll not get that opportunity. Obviously, he would be a great option to have, in that front three and sort of secondary to Isak as well, and coming in and giving competition. He's ideal for that, but the price that Brighton want, it's really sort of difficult to see how he fits into that front three. I think Newcastle, they're at a point where they need square pegs in square holes, and 2 years ago, and again, there is sort of context that this has sort of come to fruition since, and it's actually been beneficial that it wasn't square pegs and square holes. If you look at Tino Livramento playing at left back, Tonali sort of moving around the midfield as well, Harvey Barnes playing on both sides. But this summer it feels like Newcastle really need square pegs and square holes to really get going, and the fact that neither of those players ultimately solve the problems on that right hand side. Yes, I know Elanga does play on the right, and Joao Pedro can play out wide, but it would be silly to play him on out wide where he can't invert. He can play also number 10 as well. So there are obvious reasons why these players are targeted. But are they worth, this is the question I'm asking, are they worth the money that's being spent in the context? And that's where I would disagree. And the reason I would disagree, coming on to the final point, is Florian Plettenberg from Sky Germany reported over the weekend that Takefusa Kubo is available with plenty of inquiries from the Premier League for between 30 and 40 million euros. Now, I'm not saying Kubo is a better player than Anthony Elanga or Joao Pedro, but I'm saying that he's a better fit, and that price is certainly a better fit for Newcastle, because you can go and sign another striker and get two players who fit in those holes at a decent price. We've spoken at length about Kubo last week. It's not, I know he had a difficult season, but it's his underlying stats, the take-ons, the carrying the ball, the chances created, the shot creating actions. They're really, really good stats. If you haven't checked that video, I'll link it in the description. But similarly to Isak, that was when Newcastle struck then. That would be the ideal time to strike now for a decent price as well, a much better price than either of the other two. And then you can go and find another striker for around that price as well. If it's Anthony Elanga and Joao Pedro, where does that leave the centre-back money? Where does that leave the midfield money? Or a goalkeeper? There's lots of questions that need to be asked. Now, I think there's there's better ways you can spend what is probably upwards of 120, 130 million than just on two players who have done really well and they're really good players. I know that lots of people in the comment section weren't sure about Joao Pedro when we spoke about him last week. I think he's a fantastic player. I think Anthony Elanga is a fantastic player, but it's the context of the situation. Kubo, the price that you get him at, the growth that he has. Debates on social media at the weekend about whether he's an Eddie Howe type of player, which I think is a fair comment, whether he's physical enough, and whether he'd be eaten alive in the Premier League. I certainly disagree with that. But I do take on board that maybe he isn't Eddie Howe's ideal profile of player physically, but I think he is much better suited for that price than Pedro and Elanga. Neither of them are left-footed. Neither of them solve that problem. I know Joao Pedro does solve the striker issue as well, and that would be a really exciting situation to have where he comes in for Isak or even plays alongside him in second halves. He's a really, really good option. He's very skillful, very versatile, great finisher. There's lots to like about Joao Pedro. I would look at Kubo at that price because it allows you to go and then sign a striker. It gives you a clearer path to a top centre-back as well, and also the goalkeeper situation with James Trafford being of interest too. Do you think Newcastle have earned the right to be trusted? Obviously Eddie Howe, what he wants, he should get ultimately, but I do question the validity of their arguments if they're upset with the level of negotiation from Premier League clubs, because that is the market. Newcastle were led a merry dance last summer. They're in danger of that again if they keep going for domestic targets. This is why I've said that Newcastle should look elsewhere. Thanks so much for joining me. As I say, please subscribe and like this video. Please, it really, really does help. And I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to probably look at the Mark Gahey situation tomorrow, as well as some other news. And I'm really looking forward to that. So I'll see you then. Cheers.